On a summer afternoon in the small town of Chowchilla in 1976, an elementary school bus with 26 children, aged only 5 to 14, was hijacked by 3 kidnappers. The bus was found a few hours later, but the police immediately realized they were facing a huge problem. The bus had been found, but it was empty. In today's video, we're going to the small town in California to examine one of the largest kidnapping cases in American history. If you like this type of case, don't forget to like and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. On the afternoon of Thursday, July 15, 1976, the children of Dairyland Elementary School boarded their school bus to go home, just like any other day. It was the last day of their summer swimming festival, and after a long day of swim practice, they were so tired they just wanted to get back home. The bus driver was a 55-year-old man named Frank Edward Ray, and most of the children were familiar with him. Frank drove these children to school every day, and in short, both the driver and the passengers were used to this repetitive commute. It was about 4:00 p.m. The children had just boarded the bus, and no one had reached home yet. Frank was driving his usual route on a quiet street when a van entered the bus's path and blocked the road. Frank was forced to stop the bus, and immediately after it stopped, 3 men with nylon stockings pulled over their heads got out of the van. They had guns, and it was clear what their intention was in blocking the bus's path. One of the men pointed his gun at Frank, forced him out of the driver's seat, and threatened both Frank and the children by shouting and screaming. The second kidnapper sat in Frank's place in the driver's seat, and the third, seeing that the situation was under their control, got off the bus and drove away in their van. These 3 kidnappers took the bus off its main route and drove it towards the bank of the Chowchilla River. Along the way, they treated the children like animals in a cage and kept a gun pointed at Frank the entire time. After a long drive, they stopped the bus next to a shallow branch of the Chowchilla River. The 3 of them, in a completely planned manner, brought the children out of the bus one by one. They had hidden another van by the river beforehand and transferred the victims from the bus to this new van. Both vans were relatively large and had been substantially modified inside. The van's windows were completely blacked out, their entire interior was soundproofed, and these little children could neither see outside, nor did they have any light. Nor did they even know what was going to happen to them. The kidnappers abandoned the bus in a relatively remote location near the river. They transferred Frank and the children to the 2 vans and set off for the California rock and gravel quarry. How far was it? 180 kilometers, about 112 miles. The children, who were returning tired from swim class and expecting to be home, sat for 180 kilometers in the back of a van in absolute darkness, thinking only that they could be shot and killed at any moment. In the early morning hours of July 16, the vans finally reached their destination and stopped. The kidnappers opened the doors and brought the children out one by one. The victims later said they thought each person who went out was being killed and that it was the last moment of their life. The children, many of whom were not even double digits in age, and the rest having just entered their teens, thought about their short lives in the darkness and silence. But the truth was that the children who got out of the van were not being murdered, but were being transferred to a new trailer. After exiting the van, each victim climbed down a long ladder, entered a small hatch, and found themselves in a truck trailer, a trailer that had been buried underground. The 26 children, along with Frank, were forced into the buried trailer at gunpoint. As each one went down the ladder, the kidnappers asked for their name and age and wrote it on a piece of paper. When all the victims were down, the entrance to the trailer was sealed with a large, heavy 90-kilogram, 200 pounds metal plate, and then they poured dirt around the entrance and on the roof of the trailer to make it look completely buried. The victims later said that the trailer felt like a large coffin to them. They were sure they would die. Being buried meant death, and they thought there was no way they would come out of this nightmare alive. When a few hours had passed and the 26 children saw there was truly no escape, they took a look inside the trailer. Frank noticed that the truck trailer was equipped with several ventilation systems. The kidnappers had dug pits where the trailer's wheels would be to serve as a toilet for the victims, and a few mattresses were seen in the corner. Some bottled water, a little cereal, and peanut butter were also placed inside the trailer. The younger children were restless and crying. The older ones were worried, and in the midst of it all, Frank didn't know how to calm 26 children, especially when he himself believed they were all going to die together. The victims of the Chowchilla bus kidnapping endured this situation for 14 hours until Frank decided to put an end to this terrifying situation one way or another, or at least to try. Frank Ray, along with a few of the older boys, stacked all the mattresses on top of each other to reach the trailer's ceiling and access the entry hatch. A 90-kilogram weight and some dirt and debris were on top of the hatch, but after 2 hours, Frank and the children managed to move it. Their method was that Frank would push the hatch upwards, and then one of the 14-year-old boys would wedge a piece of wood they had found in the trailer into the opening to shift the weight on the hatch. Their work took 2 hours, but they finally managed to push aside the hatch and the dirt and get out. Frank brought the children out of the trailer one by one, and these 27 victims entered open space after being imprisoned underground for 16 hours. None of them knew where they were, but with Frank's help and a bit of walking, they realized they were on the grounds of the rock and gravel quarry, about 200 kilometers, 124 miles away from their homes. The victims found the quarry guard's shack and explained the situation to them. Imagine 26 children and a middle-aged man suddenly appearing before the quarry workers, saying they had been buried underground for 16 hours. From there, they contacted the county sheriff's office, and all the victims were taken to the Santa Rita jail. Why a jail? Because it was the closest facility with medical staff, and some of the victims had suffered significant physical injuries. They were all so emotionally devastated that they couldn't even sleep out of fear. The jail's doctors examined the children. Those in need of emergency medical care were treated. They were given food and water, and then the police spoke with them to be able to arrest the perpetrators of this crime as soon as possible. After all this, they contacted the children's worried families, who had no idea what had happened to their children, and most of whom thought the bus driver had kidnapped them, and sent the victims back to their parents. After the children were freed and the news spread, the Chowchilla Police Department shut down its phone lines on July 16 to prevent the media from creating a nuisance. This very phone outage also prevented the kidnappers from being able to contact the police. The plan of the 3 kidnappers in this case was to demand $5 million from the families in exchange for the children's freedom. In short, the kidnappers wanted to call the police and make their offer, but they saw the police phone lines were busy. Then they took a look at the news, and that's when they realized the 27 victims they had taken hostage had freed themselves and managed to escape. While the kidnappers realized their plan had failed, the FBI launched an extensive investigation. The victims had been buried on property belonging to the quarry, so the police immediately started investigating the quarry. In the very first hours, FBI detectives realized that the owner of this large quarry was a 24-year-old man named Frederick Woods. Since the quarry belonged to his father, Frederick had all the keys, had unlimited access to the entire quarry, and could use the equipment for free. In addition, Frederick had 2 friends, aged 24 and 22, who were brothers named James and Richard Schoenfeld. James and Richard had previously been imprisoned for vehicle theft and were on parole at the time of the bus kidnapping. This prior arrest record led the police to put the names of Frederick's friends, and of course Frederick himself, on the list of suspects. A team of FBI agents obtained a search warrant for the 78-hectare, 193-acre property of Frederick Woods's family. They searched the entire family property and also went to Frederick's bedroom. Inside the 24-year-old's bedroom, they found several newspaper clippings about the bus, a draft of a ransom note, a map of the quarry, rental receipts for the vans, the purchase receipt for the trailer, false identities, a complete list of the victims written on a piece of paper with a pen, and also one of the guns. According to the kidnapping plan found in this room, the victims' families were supposed to drop the money by airplane in the dark of night in a specified area in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Frederick and his friends had also rented a storage unit to take the money to after collecting it from the mountains. In short, All the evidence and proof against these three was found in Frederick's room, and the police were able to issue arrest warrants for all three of them. The Schoenfeld brothers tried to flee, but after 8 days, Richard voluntarily surrendered, and 2 weeks later, James was arrested in Menlo Park. On the very same day that James was arrested, they also went after Frederick. Frederick Woods had managed to leave the United States, had gone to the city of Vancouver in Canada, and was arrested there. All three kidnappers were arrested, and the strangest thing about them was that all three came from wealthy families and had officially grown up in the lap of luxury. Why would they resort to extortion and ransom? James later stated that despite having wealthy families, they and Frederick had accumulated a lot of debt. He said, "We had to kidnap multiple victims because we needed to get several $1,000,000. We chose children because children are precious to their families. The government could easily have paid us a ransom for the children's freedom because it knew children are vulnerable and would certainly care about them." All three of them confessed to kidnapping for ransom but claimed they did not harm the children. This was while some of the victims had suffered physical injuries, said they were treated like animals, were beaten, and also needed emergency medical care. Since they had confessed to the kidnapping, there was no problem with their conviction, but the sentence they would receive was directly related to the issue of harming the victims. If they were convicted of battery, they would receive life in prison without the possibility of parole. Otherwise, their life sentence would be with the possibility of parole. After several court sessions and the presentation of evidence and reports from the doctors who had examined the victims, all three were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly after the verdict was announced, their conviction was overturned by an appellate court because it was determined that the injuries inflicted on the children, which were mainly cuts and bruises, did not meet the legal standard for bodily harm. The sentences for all three were changed to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Richard, after 36 years in prison, applied for parole in 2012 and returned to society. James was also released a few years later in 2015. Frederick remained in prison, and in 2016, it was revealed that while behind bars, he had been secretly and without the knowledge of prison authorities running several large businesses, including a gold mine and a car dealership. Frederick was the heir to two wealthy families, and after his parents' death, he inherited a great deal from both his father and mother. In 2022, Frederick Woods' net worth was estimated to be around $122 million. In October 2019, Frederick's parole request was denied for the 19th time. The reason he was denied each time was that he was smuggling cell phones and pornographic material in prison and was generally a troublemaker there. During these years, he married 3 times and bought a large mansion within a half-hour's drive of the prison. I don't know why he bought the mansion, but it was probably temporary accommodation for people he had frequent business meetings with, or for his wives. In March 2022, a panel consisting of Frederick's lawyers again proposed parole. This proposal required the approval of the governor of California. The governor initially did not want to accept, but, after consulting with the parole board, decided to approve the release of Frederick Woods. On August 17, 2022, it was reported that Frederick had been granted parole and was to be released from prison soon. No news regarding his release has been published, but given the date his release was ordered, it is expected that he has returned to society by now. Frank Ray, the bus driver and the man who saved the children, received a Medal of Honor from the California Teachers Association. Frank met with the victims many times for the rest of his life, and the children continued to visit him even in their adulthood. Frank Ray died of natural causes on May 17, 2012. 3 years later, in 2015, the city of Chowchilla renamed one of its parks to Frank Edward Ray Park and declared February 26, the man's birthday, as Frank Ray Day. A study was conducted on the kidnapped children, and it was found that all of them suffered from nightmares related to the kidnapping, death, and personality changes. Some of them, even into adulthood, were afraid of things like riding in cars, the dark, the sound of the wind, mice, dogs, and hippies. One of the victims was so afraid of cars and vans that when a Japanese tourist's car broke down in front of his house and he asked for help, he shot the man with an air rifle because he was afraid of being kidnapped. Many of the victims' mental and emotional states were severely disrupted for at least 25 years after the kidnapping. Most developed depression, some turned to drugs, and a few were arrested for controlling behavior. The situation was truly tragic, and no special action was taken to improve the well-being of these children. More than 48 years have passed since the Chowchilla bus kidnapping, and all 3 criminals from this case have returned to society, but the victims still suffer from the harm inflicted upon them. One of the victims of this kidnapping, who was 10 years old at the time, said, "These 3 people basically stole our entire lives. They destroyed our childhood." In 2016, the 25 surviving kidnapping victims received some compensation. The money they received was given to the victims from Frederick Woods' trust fund, and the exact amount was not disclosed to the media. One of the survivors said about the money they were given, "The money was enough for a little medicine and therapy, but not enough to buy a house."